Mitchell here. Just want to remind you to watch my friend Dave on NEZ SEZ on YouTube at Thursday nights, 7 o'clock, maybe Thursday night, 8 o'clock. Catch NEZ SEZ with Dave and Ty.
And we're live again. Today's Thursday, August 20th, and you're tuned in to NEZ SEZ, a place where musicians can come together and inspire each other to play more guitar. Thanks for being here with us, and we have a very special show tonight. My name's Dave Nesdahl, and this is my co-host Ty Price. Hey, Ty.
Hey, Dave. Happy Thursday. It's always great to see you, and I've been looking forward to this night all week. We have a great show for you all tonight with an extremely experienced and knowledgeable guest. You know, the subject of vintage guitars. These vintage guitars, they're cool, they're highly desirable, and they command big prices. And tonight we are joined by a vintage guitar heavyweight, one of the preeminent vintage dealers and authenticators in the world. When it comes to celebrity clients and rock star gear, he has quite a resume. Just listen to some of these names: Keith Richards, John Entwistle, Bob Dylan, Ace Frehley, Bruce Kulick, James Hetfield, Billy Gibbons, Dean DeLeo, Eric Johnson, Joe Bonamassa, and one of my favorites, the great Gary Moore. Please welcome to tonight's show the owner of Abalone Vintage Guitars, Mr. Eric Ernest. Eric, welcome.
Hey, Eric. Nice to see you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, we're so glad you're here. And you know, Eric, when I think of the vintage guitar, I mean, the very first thing that comes to my head is a burst.
Sure.
Tell us about where this fascination and the mystique of the burst comes from. How did we get to where we are?
Well, it's all about the players at the end of the day, and the players that grabbed all the attention in the 60s, 70s, and 80s had a burst happen. And Bloomfield and Keith Richards and, you know, just a ton of guys like that. You know, they were playing that stuff, and it ended up on records and in magazines and in books. And those of us who are music and guitar aficionados saw that, and it inspired us to follow down that same path. Ultimately, it goes back to the music that was made with this stuff. And, you know, they sound phenomenal. They look phenomenal. They're the complete package.
Yeah, so you know, so many things come across your bench every year, and I want to get into how you started in this business. But you've seen a little bit of everything. What gets you excited? What guitar gets you excited?
Well, it's not a guitar. It's anything that nobody else has. I want the fucking thing you don't have. That is what I want. And I get them. I find them, you know. That's my job. And I've been doing it for 30 plus years. And, you know, people ask me, you know, what do you have for sale? And most of the time it's like, well, the stuff I have for sale, you don't even know what it is. You've never seen one. So it makes it a very I have a very different business approach than your typical vintage dealer. I am easily excitable and easily bored. So that's a really weird combination, which means I'm going to act like a lunatic at times, and you know, but that serves my purposes at the end of the day. I spend a great deal of time, probably more than I should, online, on forums, on Facebook pages and stuff. And I've garnered a reputation for being somewhat contentious. And that does serve my purpose, because being contentious in that context, the people who respect you and know that you know what you're talking about will be drawn to you. whereas the people who just don't have a clue, which is a huge percentage of those people, are going to be repelled by you. I'm okay with that. I don't have a problem drawing the people to me that know just what it is that, we're talking about. And as far as like my inspiration, as far as getting into guitar in the first place, here again, it goes back to the music. The first band I ever crossed paths with that really got my attention was Kiss. Yeah. And I was in middle school and I got drugged to the Kiss show at the Coliseum, 1977, Columbia, South Carolina. And, having never heard 130 dB before, that gets your attention.
It certainly does.
And not to mention the big ball of fire. And just even thinking back about that experience now, it's really kind of surprising. I was even there because that was, and much to my parents' chagrin, I've ended up where I'm at. They don't think I have a real job, I have to point out, I do not live in your basement, but that's a real issue to deal with. But seeing Kiss, there was nothing like that. They were such a stark band. Nobody looked like that, And whenever they were on the cover of a magazine, you just gravitated toward that as a kid, and had all the albums, had the typical collage on the wall with all the posters, all the classic posters, and from there it just blossomed into other bands. I've always been a huge fan of Brian May and Queen. That was a band that when I heard Killer Queen, I was like, whoa, what is this? That didn't sound like anything at the time. I was very lucky to get to see them in 1980 in Charlotte, North Carolina. Yeah, at the old Coliseum, the one that looks like a UFO. And I saw a lot of great bands coming up. I saw Rush on the Moving Pictures tour, front row, right in front of Alex. I saw Van Halen on Women and Children First in Augusta, Georgia, front row. Saw them on Diver Down at the Coliseum here in Columbia. Saw Cheap Trick on the Budokan tour at the Township in Columbia. That was a momentous sort of show for anybody who would be into vintage guitars just because of Rick Nielsen. What more do you need to say about that?
How many bursts did he take on that tour? He took 3 or 4, right?
Well, I don't know how many bursts he took, but he took like one of everything. He had 50 Strats, Carina V's, bursts, all these custom made hammers, and for a 15, 16-year-old kid to see all of that in the flesh was just, particularly when you're just getting into guitar, and to see all of that at one time was just, that was just overwhelming, and and a lot of fun. And they were here again. They were the complete package too. They were a band that, they were great performers. They had great songs. They looked great. They were an interesting band, and for guitar, wannabe like myself, guitarist wannabe, that was a great kind of introduction. To see a bit. I saw Heart when they had Roger Fisher at the Coliseum. I think that was maybe my second show that I saw. Phenomenal show. So I got it. My inspiration was the music, and then obviously, when you're 15 or 16, there's hardly anything more cool than a guitar. And unfortunately, I lived in a remote kind of area for learning about guitars. I didn't have a mentor. It was like, okay, kid, figure it out yourself. So I took lessons, just like any other kid. Right. And from there, I had a great shop in town called James School of Music, and they would occasionally get used guitars in. And every time one would come in, I would just check it out and just, pour over every square inch of it, and try to learn whatever I could. And this was also in a time where there were really no books about guitars. There was the guitar book, which was done by Tom Wheeler. And that was literally it. There were no other books. And I remember buying a copy of that down at Walden's bookstore at Dutch Square. And that was kind of my Bible. The first guy that I ever met that was really into vintage guitars was a local guy named Mike Ford. And Mike, his family owned a pipeline business, and he drove around the state as a manager. And as a result, he could pop into any music store or pawn shop whenever he wanted and buy gear. So he ran a few guitars for sale in a local paper, Carolina Trader. And I went to his house, and in his house, he had 13 jukeboxes. This is 1983, and it just fucking blew my mind. I mean, literally, you had to, it was like this times like 3, and you literally had to crawl over stuff to get anywhere in the room. And he just had like Tweed Fenders, English amps, Vox, Marshall, tube reverb units, blonde Fenders, Juniors, Les Paul Juniors. So he had it all, old microphones, old albums. And it was like, it just completely blew my mind. And I still have my old guitar book. And in parts of the book, I actually wrote things that Mike told me down in the book. Things like, oval label on a Gibson. That was stuff that was not common knowledge to anybody at all. So anything that I learned from Mike, I actually wrote down in the book. And that was kind of, Mike kind of launched me into this monster I became. And he was more of a harp guy. He played blues harp. Yeah. And that was his main inspiration. But yeah, he said he's the guy that I always name check as being the guy that really set me on the path to really learning a lot about guitars. The next big moment in time would have been 1987. 1987, I went to the Arlington Guitar Show in Texas, which there were no guitar shows even on the East Coast, I don't believe, in 87. I don't think that was for a few years till that happened. And I walked in, and it was like, oh my God, there's like 10,000 guitars at one place at one time. And it was just like, yeah, 2 years later, I had a business.
That's amazing. Oh, that's awesome. So, Eric, do you remember the first vintage guitar you bought?
Yes, I do. I bought a mid-60s Gibson Melody Maker from Pecknell Music for $275. And I'm still looking for it.
How long has it been gone?
I probably only had it for just a couple of years. Because, with anything like this, I certainly didn't have the means to buy whatever I wanted back in the day. So to get the next fix, you had to sell whatever it is you had. So so it was constantly a rotation of gear. What can I sell today to buy what I want to buy tomorrow? So that's where the Melody Maker went. But, it was a stepping stone as part of all of this stuff that, buying one thing, I learned a little bit more than I knew the day before. And, just continued on that path.
So Eric, I got a question. So when an average ordinary guy like Dave and I were to call you and we're looking for vintage guitars, what is the difference between guys like us and what we may be looking for, and then if a celebrity client were to call you and tell you what they're looking for, how are those two things really different situations?
They're not. The only difference is the rock star guys generally have a couple more zeros at the end of the price. Not because they're rock stars. They just that's the side of the street they're playing on.
Yeah.
So
okay.
So in other words, whereas you might go for a player Strat that maybe is 7 to 10 grand, they might be looking at the one that's a custom color that's 50 or 75. Mm-hmm. But that's, and it's really clean. But that's, but even then, there's still a lot of rock stars that, hey, I want a player grade Strat that's a refin that's 7,500 because they're going to just take it out on stage and beat the crap out of it. So, everybody's different in that regard, but because they're all different, they're kind of all the same,
Yeah. Going back to what you just said about, trading up back in your early days to get something better. I'd like to know what you traded to get that $500,000 and 2 guitars sitting right there.
Dude.
You don't have to answer that.
It's not so much that I don't want to answer. It's just that this is going to lead us down a tributary that's going to take about 3 hours.
Oh.
I'll try to tell you as much of it as I can, and maybe I'll just bore you to the point you'll just cut it off. But in about 1993, I saw a VHS tape of Gary Moore, and it was An Evening of the Blues, I think is what it was called, and it was him playing his verse through a Soldano SLO 100, and the tone just blew my freaking mind. I mean, I couldn't believe how great it sounded. So literally, I think that was like a Saturday. I saw it. Like Monday morning, I'm calling Soldano. I want to sell your amps. And I became a Soldano dealer, like immediately, and had SLOs, and I had the HR50 and the HR100 and cabinets and all that stuff in stock. Well, then one day, a guy walks in my shop. This would have been the same year, 93. He walks in and he goes, "Eric, I hear you're a Soldano amplifier dealer. I'd like to buy SLO 100. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I got one right over here. And he goes, okay. And you got to give him the price. He goes, okay, I'll take it. And he starts to write me a check. And I'm like, oh, shit. This fucking guy's going to write me a check for like $3,000. I don't know this guy from Adam. Just walks off the street. Mm-hmm. And so this was back in the day, you would actually call someone's bank and check up on them. So his bank, which I'm not going to say the town because that'll give it away, but I'll change the name of the town, Bamberg, Bank of Bamberg. That's what it was, Bank of Bamberg. Like, who the hell's ever heard of Bank of Bamberg? So anyway, I call his bank, and I say, yeah, I just got a check from this guy, Mr. Blah blah blah. Is this check any good? And the lady at the bank laughed at me and said, oh yeah, it's good. I'm like, okay, good. That's good to know. So he bought that amplifier. And in the next year, he proceeded to buy about $100,000 worth of guitars from me. One of the guitars he bought was Gary Moore's old 58 Les Paul, the one in the After Hours album shoot.
Wow.
And he called me and he said, look, there's a guy in Texas that has that. I think it was Gerald Weber had it. And he said, can you track that thing down and see if you can buy it? And I said, sure. So I called Gerald Weber and he said, well, we didn't actually have it, but Gary's guitar tech, Graham Lilly, had it with us and he was trying to sell it. I'll give you his number. So Graham Lilly was his guitar tech, and I think somewhat maybe a stage manager or some kind of personal manager or something too. So I called. It was actually Gary's management that I had the number to, and I called his management, and it just so happens that Gary had changed management companies, but the girl that answered the phone was Graham Lilly's girlfriend. Yeah, dumb luck. So anyway, she put Graham on to me, and we worked out a deal and bought the guitar. Just after that, the same guy bought a 50s Flying V, a 58. The Gary Moore guitar at that time was $32,000.
Wow. I'll take five. I'll take five of those.
Yeah, this would have been 90. This would have been 94, maybe 95 that he bought that. And he bought the Flying V, and it was an overspray, and he paid $40,000 for the V, which, at the time it was the only V on the market. It actually came from Kunio Kishida, if you know who he is. He's a fairly notable guitar player in Japan, blues guitarist.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact, his drummer was Clapton's drummer who just passed away. Can't think of his name, but anyway, Kunio Kishida, his bass player, also became a good friend of mine, a guy named Jerry Wasley. And Jerry Wasley was also Ty Tabor's guitar tech back in the day. So it's kind of funny.
Small circle.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny because I talk with Jerry all the time, and it's really hilarious because I ended up with this friendship with Jerry, and I never talked to Ty Tabor. So that was kind of a blessing in disguise, so to speak. Jerry's like the greatest guy on the planet. But anyway, so this customer of mine buys those two guitars, and fast forward about 15 years. In about 15 years, the Peter Green guitar goes up for sale. And I thought, wow, this would be a great time if my guy ever wanted to sell that 58 of Gary Moore's. Boy, this would be a great time to sell it, with the Peter Green Les Paul of Gary's going up for sale. And so I was like, I really need to call him and see if he wants to get in on that. And just ironically, he called me out of the blue like 2 weeks later and said, I'm really thinking about selling my guitars. I'm kind of going through a midlife thing, and there's some changes going on. And I think I just want to get out of these. Like, what do you think you can do on this? So I researched it a little bit, and I was like, well, would you be happy if I could get you $275,000 for the pair? And he was like, you really think you could get that? And I'm like, I'll see what I can do. He goes, sure, I would definitely do that. Well, I ended up selling the Gary Moore guitar for $275. So I ended up getting the Flying V as a commission for moving that. Mm-hmm. So he turned a $72,000 investment into a $275,000 in 15 years. It's like, yeah, I never should have opened a guitar shop. I should have just done that. Yeah. Would have saved me a hell of a lot of work,
That's a big return.
Yeah. So yeah, he's super cool guy. So I end up with this V, and it's got issues. It doesn't have the right case, which, some guys think that's a death nail. Not me, but some guys do.
What are they going to play? Are they going to play the case?
Well, the problem is there is probably more chicanery with 50s Flying Vs than any guitar on the planet.
Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. But see, the thing is, they're easier to fake than a burst, and they're worth about the same price-wise. So, you can take the fingerboard off of a Les Paul Jr. and build a guitar around it, basically. You can take the logo off of an amp. There's only a couple of parts you can't get. You can't get the tailpiece, you cannot get the pick guard, and you can't get the case. So as a result, those are the three parts that, you're going to use, and kind of the rubber slip pad too, but not to that degree. But those are the going to rely on to authenticate that. And because of that, some people just will not touch a Carina V if it has the wrong case. Now, I've been tracking Carina Vs for 30 years, and I've also been photographing them and cataloging their serial numbers. And I would estimate that at least half of the Flying Vs out there have had their cases swapped. So all of this obsession with the cases is just completely ludicrous. But most people are not a detail guy like me. Most people are not going to delve into the inner workings to that degree, which is why people hire me, because I have done that for 30 years and I have a lot of information stored up here that a lot of people just do not have, and they're not gonna. Right. But that guitar, I fast forward a few more years, another customer of mine, called me up and said, whatever happened to that Flying V your buddy used to own? And I said, well, I actually own it now. And he said, well, he goes, if you ever want to sell it, let me know. And I said, well, what are you thinking? And he said, well, shoot me a price. And I kind of thought about it. And my wife at the time said, I wouldn't get rid of that unless you got a burst. So I thought, well, And I knew about this burst that Rod, kind of can't think of Rod's last name. Rod out of Memphis. He was a big dealer back in the day. He still is. He had a burst for sale that had a lot of issues, but it was a beautiful guitar, absolutely gorgeous. And Rod and Hanks was the shop. And Rod, I called him up and I said, I know you got that burst. Is it still for sale? And he goes, yeah. And I go, well, how much is it? And he's like, it's 150 grand. I'm like, okay. So I sent a message back to this guy and I said, well, I tell you what, if you'll buy this burst and trade it to me, I'll do the deal on the V. And he's like, well, how much is the burst? And I said, well, it's 150 grand. He goes, well, that's really too much. And I said, okay, that's fine. And he said, if your guy ever changes his mind on the price, let me know. So I sent a message back to Rob and I said, Rob, what's the absolute rock bottom? So he was actually brokering it. He called the folks and it ended up being basically about another 20 grand off. And I could trade him guitar parts for his commission. So I basically have to trade him about $20,000 worth of guitar parts. So I sent that message back to my guy, and he's like, and literally like 2 days later, I don't even hear from him. Like 2 days later, he sends back a message. Okay, let's do it. And I'm like, okay, all right. So then it became a question of just getting the transaction done. So that's how I ended up with my burst, which leads me to this guitar. A few years ago, I guess this is 2017, maybe 18, one of the two. I decided to move my burst, which was the Memphis Mojo burst. And basically the deal we put together, I took the Alex Conti 58 in on trade. So that's how I ended up with that guitar. But that deal from beginning to end took what, 25 years? Mm-hmm. Yeah, basically 25 years.
Wow.
So, yeah, that's just how and that's the thing. People, they ask me a lot of times, well, what's your typical sort of guitar deal? There are no typical guitar deals. The last big deal I did, which was maybe a month ago, I traded an entire truckload of guitar parts for a Lexus SUV. And then I traded the Lexus SUV for another truckload of guitar parts. So, but honestly, that's why I'm here today and still doing what I do, is because I think way out of the box compared to most typical vintage guitar guys. Most vintage guitar guys, they operate a fairly small parameter as far as the sort of deals they do and the sort of things they get involved in.
Eric, we have Dave. You want to say hello to some folks in the chat? We're starting to get some questions rolling in for
absolutely
for Eric, and
let's go to
we're so glad everyone's here.
Let's say hello to Ben Coombs, Will Van Han Solo.
Now Will is our friend Eric. He just picked up a '59 Junior.
Oh, awesome!
Great guy, great player,
really good player.
He's a disciple of Tom Bukovac.
Oh yeah, who isn't?
I know we all are. I love that guy.
Yeah,
I own most of my guitars because of him.
Well, the great thing about Tom is, Tom, more so than a lot of artists, has made very good use of his pandemic time.
Yes,
a lot of artists have been, sitting on the couch singing in their PJs, off pitch and out of time, and just literally like taking their brand down the toilet. But Tom, even as lo-fi as his deal is, he's just so spot on with his observations and comments that you just got to love the guy.
I'm glued to the computer when he does his 15-minute videos.
Sure.
To it. Let's say hello to Susie Cherry.
Hey, Susie.
Fruitcake Tony, and Fruitcake, thank you for the T-shirt. I just got it. Putting it in the washer before I put it on, though. But I will wear it. Dwight Bailey is here.
Hey, Dwight.
Thomas Santiago, I Rock Z Blues. Mr. Hailstorm 74. Richard Nesdall, my dad, is here. Hello, Dad. Matthew Stewart is here. Tessie Switch is here.
Tessie Switch.
Rob from Tessie Switch. Thank you, Rob. Rob is building my pedal board as we speak.
Awesome.
Let's see. John BL 5150 is here. Hey, John.
Hey, John.
Music Therapy Laz is here. Chris Bevan is here, and he has a question. He says, for Eric, how was it meeting Ace, your hero?
Believe it or not, I've never met Ace. I've actually owned a couple of his guitars, but I've never met him. The two guitars that I've owned, one was a 77 Gibson Les Paul Custom that he used during Frehley's Comet. And that was bought from a guy in Charleston, South Carolina named Jimmy Hayward. Mm-hmm. And Jimmy was really good buddies with Ace. He is the guy who got Ace his old computer. I think maybe it was an Apple or, a Macintosh to do all of the computer graphic stuff he did in the early 90s. And Ace gave him two guitars. He gave him that Les Paul as a wedding gift, and he gave him another guitar, I think I want to say for maybe one of his son's birthday or something. And I bought both of those guitars in the later 90s. So, yeah, they didn't come exactly from Ace. And then Bruce Kulick, I did meet Bruce. Bruce, because this is actually a pretty funny story. Bruce, this was when I first started my guitar shop. This would have been 1990, and my guitar shop started inside of a sound and lighting company. And the sound and lighting company had a multi-line phone system, and the guys were notorious for pulling pranks. They would get on a line and they would call and go, "Yeah, do you have any green guitars?" And I'd go, "Well, what color green do you want?" And they go, "Oh, it's like a nice Kelly green." And yeah, I got 4. So anyway, one day I'm at the shop in the middle of the day. This was I was working 2 jobs, so it was kind of odd that I was there in the middle of the day. And the phone rings, and in the thickest New York accent you've ever heard in your life, this guy goes, "Yeah, you got any melody makers?" And I thought it was one of the guys in the back, just pranking me. So I go, "Well, how many would you like?" And the guy goes, "Well, I just want one. I want a 59 single cut 2 pickup." And I'm like, at that point, I realized, okay, this is not one of the guys in the back. They don't know that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I go, "Yeah, I've actually got one." So, we talk about guitars for a little bit, and his accent was just getting the best of me. So I'm like, are you new in town? He goes, "No, I'm just passing through." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Are you on business?" "Oh, yeah, I'm on business. I'm in town for the evening." "Oh, okay. So what do you do for a living?" I'm with the Kiss Show." "Oh, okay. So what do you do?" "I'm the guitar player, Bruce Kulick." And I'm like, "God, man, it took like 10 minutes to, dancing around that to get there." And
that's Bruce.
Yeah.
That's Bruce.
And it was funny. I take it down to the Coliseum. And super cool guy, could not have been easier to work with. And this was when Eric Carr was still alive. Mm-hmm. A picture on my site of me and Bruce that Eric actually took, and this was not long before he actually passed away. This was a Hot in the Shade tour. Mm-hmm. And it was funny. I bumped into Andy Timmons there. Danger Danger was opening for Kiss, and one other band, Slaughter. So it's Danger, Danger, Slaughter, and Kiss. And it's funny because I did the deal with Bruce. And some years later, I was at the NAMM show in Anaheim. And Bruce was signing some stuff. And I walked up to him. I'm like, "Yeah, I sold you a melody maker." He's like, oh, yeah, I remember you. Yeah. I heard you got your car towed." And sure as the world, I parked where the Coliseum security told me to park. And when I came out, my car was gone. Yeah. And I had to walk. At night to the police station. And the police station gave me a ride to the local city impound, and I got my vehicle back. And I actually wrote a nice letter to the University of South Carolina complaining about my problem. And they sent me a check for $35. So, yeah. Different times, different values, I guess.
That's
but
awesome.
But yeah, Bruce was great. Actually met Paul Stanley at the height of the Kiss craze in 1980 when they were playing on the Dynasty tour. My sister at the time worked at Bush River Mall Cinemas, and she dropped me off at Dutch Square, and I was walking out the door, and this guy with huge hair walks past me, and there was a kind of chunky guy with him with a Cheap Trick shirt on next to him. And I thought, man, those guys look freaky. And I get to the end of the corridor, and there's a limousine parked there, and I'm like, oh, shit, that's Paul Stanley. Mm-hmm. So literally I turn around, I run up, I'm like, teenager, God, it's Paul Stanley. This is like before they took their makeup off, this is a big freaking deal.
Yeah.
And so I literally like stand in his path, like, are you who I think you are? He goes, perhaps. and I'm like, oh God, I'd love to get an autograph. He goes, hey man, I'm going to be here a while. Just come get me and I'll sign something for you. And I just happened to have a couple of albums I had gotten from the record store, the record
right in your
bar,
back pocket.
The record bar, if you remember that place.
Yeah.
And I went into Eckerd's and bought a pen and walked up to him, and sure as the world, he signed it for me. It was very polite. And, he treated this little punk 15-year-old kid a heck of a lot better than a lot of other rock stars have treated me during legitimate business deals. So I've always had a soft spot in my heart for Paul, just because he was so gracious at a time when he easily could not have been. And I'm sure at that period in his career, he was just getting just lambasted every day with every kind of, crazy kid in the world. So yeah, good for him.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Great story. I want to say hello to Guitar Man Cam 45. I'm sorry, just Guitar Man 45. Frank Corcoran is here.
Hey, Frank.
Papa Blue.
Papa.
And Paul Fuchs.
Hey, Paul.
Bozique is here. Nice to see you, Bozique.
Hey, Bozique. Matthew Stewart's here with a question for Eric, Dave.
Nice. Okay, I'll get to that in 1 second. Mike is himself is here. He says it's lunchtime where he is, and he's watching the show. Tube Supio's here. Welcome, Tube. And there we have it. All right, so what's the question? I lost it.
Can you ask Eric what it was like working with James Hetfield? What'd you sell him?
James Hetfield, boy, talk about somebody impressing you. That band is run like a machine. I mean, I was mightily impressed with Metallica, just how they do business. Everything about that deal was easy as could be. James was actually initially interested in my Burst. And he was also interested in the Peter Green Les Paul, which I was brokering at the time. The owner of the Peter Green guitar, though, he was so gun shy, having been taken as badly as he was, that he wanted the guitar back in his vault in Florida. So he sent a guy up and actually picked the Peter Green guitar up and took it back to Florida. Had he not done that, James could have actually played it and might would have even done a deal on it. But the owner was wanting a pretty substantial amount of money for it at the time, maybe twice of what Kirk ended up paying at least. So that didn't go down. But I had at the time, I had the Gary Moore 58 as well. I actually sold the Gary Moore Burst, I think 4 times total.
Wow.
Which is crazy, The guitar just kept circling back, and because I knew it inside out, it made the transaction pretty easy. But anyway, I showed him those 2 Bursts, and I showed him 2 EMS double necks Gibsons from the 50s, and he ended up buying one of the EMS 1235 double necks, which I probably should find the photo of that, because that was a great photo. That deal went down in Atlanta at Phillips Arena. and he had a personal assistant that acted as a point man on that deal, and
So they're run tight like a machine, huh? And they conduct their
yeah,
business.
they it was funny. James actually flew in a guy to help authenticate the guitar, and the guy he flew in, I happen to know. It's a guy named Rick King who owns Guitar Maniacs in Seattle, and Rick is my age, and he started his very first guitar show was the Arlington Guitar Show, which was the same one that I did, and I actually met him at that show. So our paths have crossed every year for literally 30 years because we've always done that show. And he's one of the guys in the business that if he says it, you can believe it, you can take it to the bank. So pretty wise that James and Metallica had figured out that Rick was one of the good guys. And anyway, here's the photo of myself and James. And that's the two
cool.
guitars. Yeah, that photo was actually taken by my son. And it's funny because they actually had a photographer to take photos of people, but I've never actually seen the photo that Metallica took. And then this is the guitars that he actually tried out. And that was
cool.
That was backstage. He was playing it through his diesel amp.
Wow.
And those guys, they record every show. And if you're a member of their fan club, you can buy any show. Just go online and, for not much money, you can have an audio recording of the show you attend, which is pretty dang cool. And they had like an entire recording studio with them on the road, and they were using it like a remote, and it was backstage, and they were just, they just were recording that. And that's just, I thought, wow, what a cool thing for a band to do. That's kind of one of the ultimate things for fans to have a recording of your show that you went to. Yeah. So they just did every little detail they did like that was just so spot on. And just like I say, they were run like a machine. It was funny. I had my backstage pass said guitar. And didn't say like, before show, after show, it didn't say anything like that. So when it came time to hit the stage, they just walked off and left me and my son backstage. And and we're just standing there, and like a few minutes later, somebody from the staff came walking through, and I'm like, yeah, where do we go? What do we do? And they're like, oh yeah, you can go wherever you want. And I'm like, I thought it just seems kind of funny. I'm hanging out back here, and they're like, there's like no adult supervision, Mm-hmm. And the guy was like, well, we figure if you're here, we can trust you. And I thought, wow, that says volumes about them, about, I guess, their vetting process, that they just, they make sure they know what they're doing beforehand. So yeah great group of guys. And they do things the right way, and they do it on a big scale.
So you mentioned the Peter Green guitar, and Burst fans all know that wound up with Kurt, and Kurt's real proud of that guitar, takes it out, plays it a lot. So you've had some interactions with that guitar as well.
Oh yeah, Lord, yeah. I could just about write a book just about that guitar. I was brokering it for the owner after the lawsuit, and I was hired to be his expert witness in that case. And when he got the guitar back, actually it was like a collection of 60 guitars, and that just happened to be one of them. And I was hired to deal with cleaning up the mess that was left over and sell off the guitars that were real and the guitars that were fake. Something had to be done with them, and it was my job to go through and sort all of that out, which, man, I don't know, that was probably a year to a 2-year proposition, start to finish. It was a big task. And the Peter Green Les Paul was one of those. And as I said, James was interested in it then. Well, fast forward about 2 years. I think it's about 2 years. I kept telling the owner that guitar really needs to be, probably sold to somebody in the UK, because Peter Green and Gary Moore were really both kind of more respected and well known in the UK than they are really in the States. Other than rabid guitar guys, people don't know who Gary Moore is. They don't know who Peter Green is. So he ended up giving the guitar because of one of his friends made a suggestion on a dealer in the UK. And he didn't ask me about this dealer beforehand. And he gave it to a guy who's got an extremely bad reputation, unfortunately. And I guess it was about 2 years after that, I got a kind of a desperate phone call from him going, man, look, I cannot get the Peter Green Les Paul back. This guy just will, I've been trying and he just will not send it back. Well, I knew a guy in the UK named John Marlowe who is, I don't exactly know what his profession exactly was, but I think he wrote international contractual law or something along those lines in high finance. And he's former special ops. And he's a guy that you don't want to fuck with on any level at all, period. You do not want to cross him. Super nice guy, but he can get you 6 ways from Sunday. So I just sent a message to John and laid out the problem because he's a big guitar collector also. He's owned a couple of Burrs, still does. And I said, here's the problem. What can you do? He said, I can get that guitar back, no problem. I'm like, go for it. So I hooked my guy up with him and him with my guy. I said, here y'all are, sort it out. And I think it was like 2 days later, he had the guitar.
Wow. 2 days.
And I think it was like a nasty gram because see, the thing is, apparently you can enforce international contractual law easier than you can even local laws. There's something about that you can just kind of like go straight to the bad stuff immediately. And he knows the ins and outs of all that sort of stuff. So he was able to convince this guy, you really don't want to continue this or it's going to be very ugly for you. So he got the guitar back, and John's also known as a kind of side thing. He's known for being one of the biggest vintage Marshall amplifier experts on the planet. He owns all kind of Marshalls. They're like, there's a handful of these made. He's got all that stuff by the dozens, and he and another dealer named Richard Henry and myself and the guy that actually owned the Peter Green Les Paul agreed, okay, let's give the guitar to Richard Henry and see what Richard can do with it. Because Richard is in the UK and he's trustworthy and John knows him and I know him. So we felt good about like, yeah, okay, let's get Richard to deal with this. And he basically just picked up the phone and told Kirk, if you want the guitar, you can have it for what the owner paid for it, which was, I think, around $565K. There's some debate about that because you have the dollar versus the pound thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's the dollar or the pound we're quoting here, but basically Kirk got it for what, the previous owner paid for it. So it was a great deal for Kirk, but it's just funny because that James would have bought it at that price, 10 years before. So it was just kind of funny. And I guess that just signifies that ultimately that guitar was just supposed to go to the Metallica family. I mean, that's just where that guitar should have ended up. And thank God it did. Because I said all along, an iconic guitar like that needs to be with an iconic player. And that's where it went.
That's cool.
That's awesome.
Sylvesterado 1 has a question. He says, what was your favorite deal or guitar that you've ever been a part of?
Usually my last one. Because it's the ones I'm still jonesing over.
Well, then, if that's the case, why don't we get into this guitar right now?
There you go. Okay. Let me grab it.
All of you Van Halen heads are going to flip out when you see this.
Yeah, talk about crazy guitar stories. This is a 2-inch thick Boogie Bodies guitar that Van Halen owned and operated around 1980. There's so much going on with this guitar that's fucking insane that I had no idea even when I bought it. I'll tell you how it went down.
Eric, is this it in this photograph that's right there on the floor?
That is
At
it.
Ed's feet?
Yeah, and it's also in the photos of because that photo you just showed, that is Niels Lozauer's photography studio in L.A., which he still owns.
Is this it on the guitar stand?
Yep.
Yes, that is it. Also, that's also Zlaz. That's his photo, and that is a recording of "Women and Children First." But there's a lot of funny things about the guitar. I was on Reverb, and I had just sold a guitar to Neil Sean of Journey, and it was a pretty high dollar deal. So I was sitting on some funds, and I was like, okay, what are we going to do with this? Seems like a great time to buy something really, really out of the box. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Maybe something cool and interesting will pop up that, and I was watching like Reverb and eBay every day, just hawking it, trying to find something cool. It's like, I got the funds, what's out there? And I really wasn't buying anything. It was like, Strat Les Paul, I'm looking for something a little more out of the ordinary than that. So I'm on Reverb, and this guitar comes up, and I run a Boogie Bodies search every day because I'm just majorly into those. And this guitar pops up, and it says Van Halen owned Boogie Bodies Charvel, $50,000. And I look at the photo, and I'm like, I hope that's what I think it is. So I went and started pouring. I've got a catalog on my computer of like 70,000 photos. So like if you ask me about a guitar that's rare, I got something. Somewhere I got something. With over 2,000 folders, it might take me a few minutes to find it, but I can, I probably got it. So I went and started digging through all of Van Halen's guitars, and I had the photos of the guitar. And I'm looking at the wood grain. I'm looking at the picture. I'm looking at the wood grain. I'm like, hell, that's it. There's no question about it. That is that guitar. And I'm kind of like rifling through all of Ed's other guitars. And I'm looking at, the Circles Rasta guitar. I'm looking at the Rude guitar, all this stuff. And I'm going, well, wait a minute. I thought this guitar became one of those. And the thing about those two guitars,
we all thought it was the Rude guitar.
Yeah, right, exactly. Because we know Dweezil's got the other one. So the thing that's fascinating about those two guitars is the control routes on them are both different. And the control route on this one is different from those two. So I'm like, so Ed had 3 guitars that were Boogie Bodies that were 2 inches, and none of the 3 had the same control route? That's crazy. So I started researching it, and I found the same exact guitar for sale on Reverb for $1,000. And what I pieced together is the guy who was selling it had just bought it off of Reverb for $1,000. Wow. And he put it back on Reverb for $50. But in both auctions, the guitar had like a 72 Strat neck, which had no relation to Ed at all. They both had a brass Strat bridge, which certainly doesn't appear to have any connection to Ed. So really, we're talking about the body and the electronics belonging to Ed, which clearly it was. So I managed to piece together a deal with this guy, and I bought it. And when it came in, I found all just kind of really cool stuff that nobody knew about Ed's guitars. I think probably Ed didn't know either. because they're trivial details he'd have no reason to recall or file away in the catalog, so to speak. But those photos that you showed of the guitar,
right,
it's got a double cream.
Yep. There's a picture of it here with a double cream.
Yeah, I think it's a Mighty Mite pickup. I'm not sure. It's either that or DiMarzio Super Distortion.
I think it's a DiMarzio. I think back then is when he first started his relationship with DiMarzio, and that was one of the first Super Distortions they made for him.
And then this might be a little difficult to see, but this is it in the studio with recording Women and Children First, and it's still got the double creams in it. Yeah.
Well, you'll note that in that photo, the pickup does not have a pickup ring. Well, you can see that the guitar clearly has a pickup ring.
Yeah.
So before I even bought the guitar, I asked the guy, I said, is that pickup, are there any holes where a pickup was mounted to the control cavity, to the pickup cavity? And he said, yes, there are 2 holes. I'm like, great. That's exactly what I want to hear. So the guitar comes in and there are no holes in the bridge pickup cavity. That pickup was not mounted to the body. So that photo that you see, that pickup is just sitting in the guitar loose.
Really?
He probably just wedged it in. Now, I have some precedent for that because the 3 pickup Les Paul that I owned that was Ace Frehley's, the middle pickup was wedged in with a Howard Johnson's matchbook cover. It was not mounted either. So, necessity is the mother of invention.
That's right. That's right.
And that's what Eddie's all about.
Right. So another strange thing about the guitar is it has a wooden backplate. And I just thought, well, it looks homemade. There's no way in hell that's original. Well, the guy didn't have a photo of the back of the control plate, so I didn't know what it looked like when I bought it. But when it came in, that control plate is covered with copper tape. The inside of the guitar is covered with copper tape. And all of the joints where the copper tape is joined is also soldered together. So the back plate is definitely original to the guitar. But here's one curiosity. That is also how Charvel shielded their early guitars. So Charvel had to have some kind of hand in this, or somebody that worked for Charvel had some kind of hand in this. Another interesting detail. If you look at the neck on that guitar in those 2 photos you showed, that Strat neck has a square heel.
Yeah, like a Tele, yes.
Exactly.
Most of his guitars at that time did. In fact,
yes and no. None of his Strat necks did. That's the only Strat neck. Now, he had Dan Electro necks, but that was the only Strat neck with a square heel. And it's because of this guitar, I figured out where it came from.
Yeah, there's a square heel there. I don't know if that translates or not.
Yeah, that's a good photo of it. It really is. That neck was originally on his Charvel Star that they made for him. And nobody knows that. And the only way I figured it out is I found one photo of Ed from, I think it's March or April of 79 from the back. And you can see there's a Strat neck on that Star guitar before he put the Dan Electro neck on it. And I'm certain it's the same neck. So he took the neck off.
Go ahead.
The White Star, the one that he had. So, and that was the second guitar. Let's see, second or third. I guess it would be the third guitar that Charvel. Well, yeah, I guess it'd be the third guitar that Charvel made for him, because they did the black and yellow, and then they did the yellow. Is it the Hydra? The Carl Sandoval thing.
Terrible.
Yeah.
I think that guitar's kind of cool.
But what's crazy?
Am I the only person on earth that thinks it's cool?
Probably. The funny thing is, though, the neck that was on that guitar bounced around several guitars, and that neck right now is on the Frankenstrat and
That's
has
absolutely
been
correct.
and has been for years.
Absolutely correct. Yep.
So yeah, that neck has had a strange lineage over time. But the thing that really amazed me was when I was trying to sort all of this stuff out, was just realizing how frequently that Ed swapped shit around. I mean, it's literally shocking. Like I previously thought maybe he swapped stuff around like before the tour or after no, I think he swapped shit around like on a weekly basis. I think he was just like continually just swapping stuff around because it doesn't matter. Okay, for example, the Frankenstrat had that weird 3x3 Dano neck on it during the Starfleet project.
Just going to bring that up.
And I don't think I've ever seen that neck on that guitar any other time other than that recording.
Well, he had that neck on in the dressing room to the US Festival, and then when they went on stage, it had a Kramer neck on it.
But what was the neck on? Was it on that, or was it on? Because he had it on. He had it on one of the Fair Warning guitars for a while.
Yes, he had it on. He had it on the Rude guitar, and then during Starfleet, he had it on Frankenstein because apparently he wanted to have a rosewood fretboard on it. And if you see, there are some pictures of the backstage area of the US Festival in '83 with that neck on it.
That is hilarious.
And then on the stage, it has a Kramer beak neck.
That is hilarious. Well, there you go. Who could predict such things? And by the way, I think that Starfleet project was the best tone Eddie ever got. I love that. I love it. And I'm a huge Brian May fan. Brian is my favorite guitar player by far. And I thought Eddie just killed on that.
Oh, yeah. No question. Bit Tom says the question is not how many guitars, but how many necks.
How many necks?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Right.
Lots of necks.
Right.
Lots of necks.
Oh, yeah. But to finish the story on this particular guitar, I ended up having to become somewhat of an expert on Floyd Rose bridges because of it, because it's like I needed to get exactly the bridge Ed had, which was not an easy or cheap task.
Man, I would have.
Dave,
I wish I would have
Dave
known
knows
because
all about that.
I have one. I would have sold it to you very cheap.
I paid $2,000 for that one.
Yeah, I would have given it to you for a fifth of that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if I need another one, but
mine is clean. Mine is super clean. From
this one, the great thing about this one is it matches the patina of the guitar perfectly. So I'm totally happy with it. Yeah. But what's funny is the neck that I ended up putting on this guitar is a Boogie Body's neck that I've owned for 25 years. And one of the biggest problems with Boogie Body's guitars is the necks almost never fit the bodies. They are all over the place. Like right now, I have probably 8 Boogie Body's necks. I have maybe 2 Boogie Body's bodies, and I don't think any of those necks fit those bodies.
Wow.
Seriously. And I'm looking at my age and I'm going, well, how long is it going to be? Because hell, I've had this neck 25 years. How long is it going to be before I find another neck to fit? Am I going to be 80? Will I give a shit at 80? Probably not. But
I'll be right back. I got something I got to show you. I'll be right back.
Awesome. But it just so happens that this neck that I had fit the guitar perfectly, like fit like a glove.
Meant to be.
And it's exactly like Ed's necks, his Boogie's necks, and it's from the same time frame. So I was quite pleased to get that guitar put together, and the fact that it came together as solid as it did is a miracle.
So Eric, you got a body that belonged to Ed that he used in the Women and Children first recording session. Why was no one else looking for these guitars?
Well, nobody was looking for that one because everybody assumed it got painted.
Okay.
Myself included. Like I said, I didn't figure it out until basically I'd already bought the guitar. And I was like, whoa, this is not one of those 2 guitars. And then the more I got to looking, and I don't know if you know who Scott Smith is.
I know Scott.
Yeah.
He's a great friend of mine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Scott and I talk about once every 6 months to a year, and we're on the phone for like 4 hours, getting caught up, and some of this stuff he obviously didn't know either. And I learned so much about, like I say, about Ed's guitars that, that I don't think anybody knows. Certainly nobody, I don't think, knew about the Strat head on the Star, because nobody knew where that square heel Strat neck came from. But
I've seen videos of it. I mean, I've seen 8mm videos of him playing that from the Second World Tour.
Yeah, right.
With that neck on it.
Right, but they're certainly not clear enough to see that it has a square heel, because
that's true.
Yeah, that's that's one of those holy grail tours that everybody wishes there was like real high quality video of, because that, to me, Van Halen second tour and Women and Children First, those two tours are the emblematic tours of Van Halen's career. That was when they were just like on fire and just,
That's when David could sing.
Yeah, right. Yeah, good point. Good point. So
real quick, can you show that guitar one more time? I'm gonna solo you. Yeah, man, that's crazy good.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and that heel, the thickness of that heel is what's so insane. It's also funny, Ed, he name checked this body in Guitar Player magazine at the same time. And he said that Boogie Bodies made him a 2.5-inch thick mahogany body. It is, for a fact, 2 inches, not 2.5 inches.
Right, I read that too. So check this out.
Wow. That's an amazing
You
copy.
might be able to see the circles underneath if I can get it. Because this was circles before it was Rasta. It was circles.
Wow, Dave.
You can see you see the circles up here?
Yeah, I can. Yeah. Yep.
Small to larger. Yeah.
That's cool, Dave.
And you can see the back. You can see the "Bye, see you later" underneath it.
Right.
Well, let's see if I can.
That's awesome. A lot of work went into that.
Oh yeah. This was the hardest one. 2 inches thick. How are you? Yeah, there you go.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, that's awesome.
The headstock, he repainted it in early '83.
Right.
And you can see I have the Goto crowns on it, and I have a vintage prototype gold nut on it.
Yeah, there you go. Right. Yeah, with the hump. Yeah.
Yep. Unfortunately, that's a newer Floyd, but because they're hard to find the gold shallers. Anyway.
Yeah, Dweezil. It seems like Dweezil's got a weird bridge on his now.
It's a Schaller Floyd Rose. It's a
it's
mid-80s Schaller.
Yeah, that would drive me crazy. I'd be
and
like,
I think
okay.
I think Eddie may have given him that to put on there.
That is funny. Okay, well that would make sense.
Yeah.
Dave, is that an R5 nut?
No, this is not. This is an R2.
Yeah.
I don't think he had an R5. I don't think it was a very wide neck on that guitar to begin with.
Well, yes and no. From best I can tell, Ed's necks were all an R5 width, but he had an R2 nut on them.
Yeah, so that I knew. But
yeah, if you look at his nuts, the Floyd Rose never goes to the end. It's kind of bizarre. It's just one of those details a lot of people don't know.
Well, here's the problem with the R5 nut and the string spacing. If you put an R5 nut on an R5 nut shelf, which is 1 3/4 inches, your low E and your high E are going to hang off the edges of the fretboard. You're not going to get any play off of them. And that's the truth of any of them. I have 3 Charvels here, 3 early San Dimases that came with R5 nuts. But if you know anything about Floyd Roses, an R3 will fit on there perfectly because of the height. You don't need any shims. R3 is the same height as an R5, but it's smaller. So you get the string spacing where you have room on both sides of each string.
Right.
And that's what I did.
I think maybe Jackson's used an R3, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Eric Myers says, never a dull moment with Eric Ernest if you're a guitar nerd.
Well, he would know better than anybody because Eric used to work in my shop back in the 90s. And he was commonly referred to as Eric Jr. or the other Eric. So it was kind of confusing because he would refer to himself as the other Eric or Eric Jr. a lot of salespeople would call on us and they would say, well, when your dad gets in, and Eric was not that much younger than me. He was in college at the time. But Eric owns a studio up in outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, and he's his predominant instrument is saxophone, but he also plays guitar and is a great musician.
Cool. Eric, glad you're here. He has a question. He says, didn't we discuss that he might have been using a Pearly Gates during some of the time Ripley was working for him?
I don't know the origin of that. He may be talking about, I actually owned a guitar of Ed's that was a Ripley guitar that was the Ripley test guitar. That if you've ever seen any photos of 5150, he's got all these guitars lined up on the wall. And there's one that's got some funky stickers on it and it's burned and has all kind of crazy stuff. That was a guitar that Steve and Ed used to test out pickups and electronics. And the pickup that was in it actually says Edward Van Halen model on the back of it. That's handwritten. And the funny thing is, and it's a Duncan pickup, but the funny thing is the handwriting looks like Ed's. And the only thing I can figure is Ed, at that time, I don't think he liked Seymour Duncan. And I think he did that as a gag, just to kind of tweak, the Duncan and say, well, this is my pickup. This is my model pick. Because it does look like his handwriting, but there was no Edward Van Halen model pickup. Certainly not back then that was a Duncan.
Right.
But that may be what Eric is talking about, because that pickup, I think spec-wise, it ended up being a custom, which I think was very similar to a Pearly Gates output-wise.
7 over 8 is here. My friend Jay. How you doing, Jay?
Hey, Jay. Hey, Amanda.
Hi, Amanda. Nice to see you.
Eric, do you know what happened to the Les Paul Ed played early on that was missing the neck pickup?
I know where he still has it.
Yeah.
Question. Okay.
Well, that's the funny thing about Ed. Ed really, like his earlier stuff, he just did not get rid of it, which makes me end up with this body just so crazy. Because, up till this, pretty much everything was accounted for. And now we realize this was unaccounted for. And then he had another guitar on the Fair Warning tour that at some point had the Dan Lecter neck on it. That body is unaccounted for also. And
Three single coils?
No, this is another guitar. It's it would look just like this, except the body looks like it's made out of something other than mahogany. It looks like it might be maple or alder. I don't think it's ash because it doesn't look like it has any grain. But the guitar you're talking about, the 3 single coil one, that guitar got painted black at some point. And the known photos of it are what would have been from probably, I guess, the club days. And it had
early, and he used it in 78. Yeah,
right. And it had a Telecaster bridge pickup in it, and I think he swapped that thing around all the time too. I think I have an idea where that guitar is, so I'm trying to actually hunt it down, and it may have the 3 on the side Dano neck on it today, but he does not have that guitar.
I think he also played the beginning of Women in Love on that guitar. I think
really?
That was, I think the.
Oh yeah, that's hilarious.
Yeah, Will has a question. He says, Eric, do you know of Ed ever using a double cut cherry LP Junior? I found a photo circa mid-70s, but can't find any other evidence of it being used.
Yeah, I've seen the same photo that he's talking about. And yeah, Ed clearly did. But that's the funny thing about Ed. There's all kind of guitars that you see 1 or 2 photos of him playing that it's kind of inexplicable. He had a 70s Cherry Sunburst Les Paul Custom. I think he used at Texas Jam. And it's my understanding he was using that because their gear arrived late. So he's playing somebody's Les Paul Custom. I don't know whose, but he's playing somebody's.
And he did say in interviews, even recent interviews, that he has played every type of guitar known to man. Well,
here's the thing. Whenever Ed when his Kramer endorsement deal was up, literally every manufacturer on the planet striped up a guitar and sent it to him and said, "Please play our guitar." So he probably has one of every guitar ever made in some kind of red, white, black configuration. Everybody wanted him as an endorsee before he went to Music Man.
I thought the coolest guitar that was made for him, other than that, was the Paul Reed Smith, the one that Paul made for him. It was just a red body, one humbucker on a slant with a Floyd on a maple neck. Just a regular.
He got a lot of that stuff, like I say, and Ed has always, followed his own path. I think that if you sent him a guitar that was striped up, he probably was less inclined to like it than if you just sent one of your just one of your guitars. He was just funny about people, doing his deal, even if they were trying to do it with the best of intentions in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Eric, I've got to ask you. So you've spent decades researching all of these guitars and all these different brands. In your world, in your world as a broker and as a dealer, what do you identify as the first electric guitar?
Well, the very early electric guitar history is a bit of a mystery because not a whole lot is known. You go back to the early Rickenbacker stuff. They were probably the first to legitimately do it. That would have been around 32. But I've got a magazine, like Popular Science magazine from 1924, and it has a quote unquote electric guitar on the cover of it in 1924. So clearly there were a lot of people. And what's funny is the photo, which I haven't shared this at all with anybody because I've kind of kept this under wraps, but the guitar is being played through a radio wirelessly in 1924. In 1924. And it's like I say, it's an artist rendering. But if they were doing that in 24, there were people working on it in the 20s. And there was one company, God, I can't think of the name of it. They probably beat Rickenbacker to the punch. But the guitar pickup that they had was so crude. Stromberg. It's like a hyphenated name. It's like a Stromberg something. But anyway, that guitar is generally kind of thought of as predating the Rickenbacker. But the pickup was so crude and had such low output that a lot of people don't name check it because of that. And there's only a handful of examples, maybe even only one known to exist. And it looks just like an acoustic guitar. You wouldn't necessarily even know that it wasn't electric, whereas the Rickenbackers, they were designed to look like something different. So as a result, most people name check the Rickenbacker as being the first, which was actually called Roe-Patton, was what it was originally called. There's only one Roe-Patton known to exist. There may be more, but with all this stuff, you never know. I owned a Ken Roberts model that when I bought it, the Ken Roberts was from 36. At the time I bought it, there were only 3 known to exist. And I've since owned 2 more since then. So there's probably at least a dozen of those known to exist, and I've owned 3 of the dozen.
Wow. All right, we got a couple of questions, comments in here. Will is saying Stromberg. I'm gonna butcher this. Voisnet. Stromberg,
yes,
Voisnet, is that right?
That is correct. Yep. I can't pronounce
Bit
it.
Tom says, "What is?"
It.
Bit Tom's got 2 questions. Is the Rick you're referring to the frying pan?
No, the Roe-Patton, which was the first one, looked somewhat kind of spud shaped, and it was like the Ken Roberts in that it was a wooden guitar that looked somewhat acoustic, but it had a horseshoe pickup on it. So that big horseshoe pickup was a dead giveaway that it was not an acoustic guitar. And the Ropatons and the early Ricks had that.
Mike Neese says Alvino Ray was doing some cool stuff back in the 40s and 50s.
Absolutely. He was one of those guys that when you hearken back to the very beginning of electric guitars, he's definitely one of the godfathers. Here again, a lot of the stuff that even he did is kind of lost to time because his earliest known guitar equipment, a lot of it's known, but a lot of it you don't know the story behind it. Like, when did he get it? How is it connected to him, and kind of what is the lineage of all that stuff? It's amazing that here we are in 2020 and, stuff still comes out of the woodwork that you go, wow, didn't know that. Did anybody know that? I bought
You learn stuff every day.
I bought it. Yeah. I mean, people think I'm full of shit when I say this, but the majority of time I spent is probably researching. I just research continually. I have to, because I'm always bumping into stuff and going, should I buy this? How rare is this? And if it's something I haven't seen before, now all of a sudden I've got to get educated on it quick. So I might kill 2 days researching a guitar that I end up not even buying. So it's a strange thing, but I bought a double neck out of France. I guess it's close to 10 years ago. That is a Gibson double neck from 1937, and it's a solid body.
Oh, wow.
Is it a semi-hollow? But yeah.
No, it weighs 17 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the funny thing is it's a Get steel. It has a Spanish guitar neck on the top, and it has a lap steel on the bottom. So it's Junior Brown before Junior Brown was even born, which is pretty astonishing. But the thing about it was made for a well-known guitar player in Belgium at the time. I actually have photos of the guy from 1937 with the guitar, which is pretty amazing that the photos even survived. But if you know your history, you know that Belgium was in the middle of World War like a year later. So that guitar, in some ways, got filed under the bed and got lost to time. So people didn't even realize it was even made. The serial number, I think, is like 801 or something. So there's nothing particularly about the serial number that would even stand out if you were looking through the ledgers. But here's the guitar.
Look at that.
Oh, yeah. Look at that. You know what? I've seen pictures of that.
Yeah, I've actually put it online, but I haven't actually, and this is what it looks like today, but I actually haven't really rolled it out. The guys at a couple of the guys at Gibson, like Matt Kohler, he knows I have it.
Oh, that's cool. Ben Tom says, Eric, thanks for answering my questions. Super knowledgeable and interesting individual.
Yeah. Real quick, also, Damp Taco Lover asked, going back to the Van Halen thing real quick. He asked, where's Eddie's Les Paul Custom with the Floyd and the stripes? It didn't have a Floyd Rose on it. It had a Steinberger Trans Trem, and it does have stripes, and it is a custom, and it also has Steinberger tuning pegs on it that look like old banjo tuners. He still owns that guitar, and he has recorded with that on some later Van Halen records.
Damp Taco Lover says, who has SRV's number one? We interviewed Andy Aladort several weeks ago. He has written a really great book about Stevie Ray Vaughan. Fantastic book, maybe the deepest dive into Stevie Ray yet. On our show, he said that Jimmy Vaughan has it. And you can go back and watch that on Dave's channel.
He does own it, but right now it's sitting in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Hey, Wayne.
Hey, Wayne, how you doing? My buddy Wayne from North Carolina.
So Eric, there's a lot made of vintage guitars now in custom shops. So
Sure.
you got the Fender custom shop turning out Strats and Tellys that look like they're 50, 60 years old. You've got Gibson sending out aged guitars, Les Pauls. How do you rate the quality of those guitars when comparing them to something that's truly vintage?
Well,
I know they're two different things, but how would somebody in your position look?
I
look
don't
at
think
those?
there's any question that Gibson and Fender both are making the best stuff they've ever made. Particularly Gibson, since they hired Matt Kohler. Matt is. I actually had some. I've known Matt for years prior to him working for Gibson, and he's a detail guy, and he knows all those. Maybe not all of them, but he knows most of those little vintage details that unfortunately were getting overlooked. So he has really brought their game up in terms of just detail to getting some of those minute things nailed out. Some of the stuff, like even like the material of the nut, there's still argument about like what the actual material was, because there's some thought that the materials that they use may have had mercury or may have had asbestos, and as a result, they can't quite do the same exact chemical composition to the plastic that they once did. That's probably true, but I have a lot of parts. That's one of the things I'm known for. And I have a lot of NOS Gibson parts. That's one of my specialities. And I have a bunch. At one time I bought over 70 original Les Paul nuts from the 50s. And I've been selling those over the last couple of years. But there's no material. Everybody calls it nylon 6.6 or nylon 4.6, and I don't believe it's either of the two. I think it's something else. But the funny thing about plastic is, if you change one chemical component of the plastic, it now becomes a different product. So let's say you have a plastic for a pick guard and you add a anti-static property to it. It's now a different product. So that makes nailing this stuff down, because I know Gibson tried to reverse engineer those plastic nuts back when Edwin Wilson was with them. And the results they got from the chemical company that did the testing was, well, it probably is nylon 6.6, but they couldn't say for sure. And that's literally at the level we're at now. We're literally trying to nail down the just most minute details. But those details are important because they affect the overall vibe and tone. I mean, it's like, that was on a forum the other day, and I'm like, and somebody was like, well, it's close enough. And I'm like, well, the hell, if it's close enough, I'll just buy a reissue. Why even mess with going down the vintage, rabbit hole if close enough is just good enough? I will
tell you one thing. I've owned many R9s from, as they came up, and when they were using bone nuts, they sounded good, but never really sounded like an old 58, 59.
Well,
when they started using that nylon stuff, it became more believable, because what it does is it makes the sound a little rounder. It's not as
the nut material that Gibson uses on most of their guitars now. I forget what it's called, if it's Corinne or something like that, but the material that they're using is actually very hard. And it's even more hard than I think the nylon 6.6. And you can do, the real simple thing to do is do a drop test. If you have 2 or 3 nuts or samples of plastic, just drop them on something hard and just see how it pings. And that's one way to tell how close the material is. And that's why I don't think that the new nut material is exactly the same as the old, because it does not ping the same way. Those old nuts have a very specific ping to them. It's a very high-pitched ding, almost like a bell. It's pretty fascinating. Whereas mostly a plastic nut, if you drop it, will just have like a dull thud. So, and then, like I say, it goes back to like how much vinyl does it have in it? What's the chemical composition? The nut hardness varies a tremendous amount. So, it is what it is. But Gibson and Fender both are doing great jobs as far as replicating stuff. I know a lot more about Gibson than I do Fender, but you've only got to play one of their guitars to figure out that they've got a lot, that they have figured out.
Now, let me ask you this. Do you think that today's reissues are the new golden age of Fender and Gibson?
If I had to guess, I would say probably. And the reason is there has been some talk for years about restricting the use of mahogany internationally. Just like you had CITES come in. Looks like my battery is getting close to going. It looks like with the CITES treaty, they did versions 1 and 2 of that. And version 1 put Brazilian on the list. And version 2 put Indian rosewood on the list, which just pissed everybody off. And they've since amended that and taken it off. But what's going to happen when they put mahogany on that list? And that's probably going to happen. So when they put mahogany on the list, well, what the hell are you going to do with a Les Paul? What are you going to make a Les Paul out of? So
you won't be able to take one across. You won't be able to take one international.
Yeah, that's when people start bandsawing 70s, Les Pauls and making new guitars out of them. Mm-hmm. But no, Fender, I think, has had the same issue this year with ash. I think ash has become, for a variety of reasons, a difficult wood to come by because of maybe some flooding and the availability to harvest it. So, that happens to enough different kinds of wood. Now, all of a sudden, you're looking for different alternatives. And there's a reason they use mahogany. There's a reason they use ash. There's a reason they use that stuff. And it's because of the sound. And, the thing that amazes me is that when you look back on all of this stuff when it was designed, a lot of this stuff has its roots going back to the 30s. And it was designed well right out of the gate. Go back to audio stuff. The audio stuff that was designed by Western Electric in the early Altec stuff, and RCA, that stuff's still the gold standard. And it was designed in the 30s. People with slide rules in the Bacchus, but they were thorough. And, they designed things based on the results and not necessarily what's the bottom line or how much is it, what's our price point we're shooting for and what market are we trying to squeeze this into. Those weren't considerations necessarily. It was more of a let's design it first and then see if we can do it. And because of that, those items have held up over time, whereas things that are designed now, it's almost like they're designed specifically to sell and not necessarily what the actual, the design, how solid is it? So, the designs that were done, they have withstood the test of time, and they're going to continue to withstand the test of time. And, when they start restricting woods, it's going to be a real problem because then, like I say, this could be the end of an era in that regard. It really could.
Wow. Eric, we've got a couple of questions about the guitars that are behind you. Can you give us a quick overview about those two guitars?
Sure. Well, this one is the 59 or 58 Les Paul that was owned by Alex Conti. It is a refin. This guitar, Alex owned it. The provenance of it came out of Germany, and I've got the previous guy's name written down who owned it, and he was a notable German guitar player. But much like the Stromberg Voyer thing, I can't remember it. But that guitar is a refin. It's a factory reneck. Alex Conti was actually offered the job to replace Ed King and Leonard Skinner. Yep. And he turned him down. His band Lake opened for Skinner on the tour, and I want to say 75, maybe 76. Mm-hmm. And the neck on that guitar was broke on that tour, and he had Gruen reneck it. And they actually sent it to Gibson, and Gibson actually got an old billet from the 50s and used the same fingerboard. it looks completely correct. You would never even know that it was renecked, which makes me think that's legit. But the logo on this thing, which I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not, but the logo on this looks like it was hand cut. It doesn't look like any other Gibson Les Paul or any other Gibson logo I've ever seen.
Oh, look at that.
It's an open B and an open O, but the shape of the logo is very odd. I've never seen another one. So that was clearly hand done. But yeah,
has that had a headstock break?
No. But it has been refinished 7 times. It was refinished sometime around the time Alex had it, because if you see photos back in the 70s, that was not the original finish. So it was clear to already refinish once. And then when it was damaged and Gibson redid it, they shot it in clown burst. And it pissed Alex off so bad that he sold the guitar. And then the next guy that got it had it refinished, and then it got refinished twice after that. And I actually had it painted myself, because the previous guy who painted it twice, and he just didn't do a very good job at all. So I had it repainted, and my guy did an okay job. I'm not crazy about the yellow. It's not yellow enough. And I specifically asked that it be shot twice in yellow if it had to get the middle of that, because I'm very familiar with what people do wrong on Les Pauls when they reshoot them. And nobody gets the yellow right. Everybody thinks it's the red, but it's not. It's the yellow. And he did not shoot it. He did not shoot the yellow twice. And he tried to tell me that, well, if I shoot it twice, it'll just get darker. Well, I know enough about tints to go, yeah, it's going to get a little darker, but it will be more yellow. And he didn't do that. So I was just so upset by the whole thing that I just said, I'm just going to wash my hands of it. But
now, is that guitar for sale?
Yeah, it's for sale. Had the guitar turned out exactly the way I wanted it, I would certainly have been more inclined to keep it. And it's one of those details that maybe I'm the only guy on the planet that it would just bug the living shit out of.
Well,
but it does. I can't help it, you know. So
I got to tell you the truth. That's the only reason why, before we went on, I asked you if this was a Sandy collector's choice, because it looks like a new guitar. Right. I mean, from here anyway, it looks like a newer painted guitar. Well,
it was painted, I guess 2 years ago was when I had it done. And I only asked for 3 things. I said I wanted it unfaded, I wanted the yellow to be really yellow, and I wanted the entire guitar covered with very dark amber. And the reason I said that was I wanted it unfaded was I was going to fade it myself. Well, few things. He didn't do the yellow like I asked him. He did not do an unfaded burst like I asked him. And he did not put amber top coat over it like I asked him. He didn't do any of the 3 things I asked him to do. And I paid him cash to do this, several $1,000s, and he was actually a friend of mine, and we're really not on speaking terms these days, as you can imagine. But what I found out subsequent to that was he no longer uses aniline dyes, and he mixes it to look the color he wants. Well, why would you do that? You're going to put a sunburst on a burst, and you're not going to use aniline dye? That's just asinine. So while I was actually at his shop, I had him throw 2 more coats of amber over the top of it to darken it. And then I had to drive all the way home, 8 hours, and come back and drive the next week to pick it up. So the whole ordeal was an ordeal. And
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, but it happens, you know. At some point, you just have to go, well, it is what it is. But it probably cost me $20,000 to $30,000, because that guitar, if it were done right, would be $125 all day long. But as it sits, $190, somewhere in there. So the next guy, if he wants to get on that horse and have it painted time number 8, you know, go for it.
May I ask, what do you think of Historic Makeovers doing it?
That's who did it.
Okay.
Yeah. Right?
You guys know too many of the same people.
Right. Well, here again, where do you take that? Because, like I say, I was very good friends with Kim. In fact, very few people know this, but I let Kim borrow my burst, the Memphis Mojo. He had it for about 6 months, just to shoot test samples. And you generally just don't give your legit burst to anybody, for whatever reason. So, so that's how much faith I had in him to get it done. But why and how all this ended up like it did, after this, Kim painted that guitar Lazarus for Joe Bonamassa.
Right.
And he nailed it. Looks fucking incredible.
And
I was
that's
like, why
what
couldn't
Joe
that be
uses
my
right
guitar?
now. Yeah, Joe uses that guitar exclusively now.
He changes from tour to tour, so it probably won't be on the next tour, but he certainly took it out, and it certainly sounded amazing, and it looked incredible. But I also told Joe the story I just told you before he had it painted, because he knows Kim. So I'm certain that he ran that up the flagpole with Kim. So I'm certain Kim made damn certain that he didn't make the same mistake on that guitar. But it's funny. I've seen another guitar that Kim painted since then. He did the same thing as mine. So
I think
why,
it's certainly
how is it you can get it right, like I say, on one, and then go back and make the same mistake you did before? I don't get it.
Well, because it's Joe Bonamassa. It's Joe.
Maybe so, but you would think somebody who's your bud, that you wouldn't fuck his guitar up.
I would think so too.
Eric, have you ever been to Nerdville?
Actually, believe it or not, I have been to both. Well, I've been to 2 of the 3 Nerdvilles during the pandemic. When I flew to LA back in May, Joe hooked me up with Neil Sean very graciously. Joe hooked me up, and Neil got one of these EMS guitars like this, a 50s double neck. And I flew it to LA. Actually, I flew it into LA and then drove the guitar to San Fran to deliver it to Neil. And because Joe hooked me up, what's funny is I had bought this really cool old Martin sign from the 60s in LA off of eBay, and it was local pickup only. And I was just hoping and praying that I had some deal that would go down in LA so I could go pick it up or send a buddy over to get it or whatever. It just so happens like 2 weeks later, I'm in LA. So I went by and picked the sign up, and I gave it to Joe for just being a bud and hooking me up like he did. And so I literally I get to LA and I'm like, "Hi, Joe, here I am." And he's like, "Yeah, come on by." So I went by Nerdville West, and he rolled out the red carpet and gave me the grand tour, and I hung out for about 4 hours, which seemed like 4 minutes. And got to just take the whole thing in, and it was a blast. And Joe this year has probably bought more guitar signs for me than I've sold guitars this year. He has bought an incredible number of signs from me, and he had done that. Literally, one of them, I sold him some when he was here at the township, and then like 2 weeks later, he was playing in Charlotte. And I drove those up to Charlotte. And literally the day after that, the Kirk Hammett exhibit at the Columbia Museum of Art started. And I did that for a week, yourself included.
Yeah.
And then it was literally like the next week the pandemic hit. Yeah. So I went to Nerdville West and did that and gave Joe that sign. And then Joe and I are usually in touch every couple of weeks or every couple of months at least. And I posted something online, I think on Instagram, and he saw it and he's like, "Yeah, I really want that sign." I'm like, "Yeah, no problem, sure." And I sent him some photos of some other signs. He's like, "Yeah, I like that too." So I said, "Well, I'll be in Chattanooga in a couple of weeks." And he said, "Well, I'll be in Nashville. Just let me know." So sure enough, I sent him a message like, "Yeah, I'm going to be in the area this week if you want to get together." He's like, "Yeah, come on up." So I went up to his to Nerdville East in Nashville and got the big tour of that. And the Nashville location, in some ways, I actually liked it better than his West Coast location. And it may have been because it was at night and it was in the middle of a city. It just had a certain electricity that, being in Laurel Canyon doesn't necessarily afford you. But it just had it's just and the thing about Joe is, which actually I should probably call this Turdville, because, as kind of a name check to Joe, because it's kind of like his deal, but kind of not. But Joe's got a great eye for just displaying stuff. I mean, particularly, like I say, is Nashville, Nerdville East. He's just got, it's amazing to truly see. And I think there's videos that you can see it online. But if anybody will go to my Instagram account, which is Abalone Vintage, I've got photos of both of those trips on there. And then on my personal Facebook page, Eric Ernest, I've got a lot more photos on my Facebook page, like really high res, like 2,000 by 4,000 sort of pixel sort of stuff. But yeah, Joe's the complete package. He's a great player. He gets great sound. He knows his gear. He's into all the cool stuff like this, which, I've been buying signs. I started buying that stuff, all the peripheral sort of stuff. I started buying in the 80s when almost nobody was buying that stuff. And in large measure, I was buying it. One, the opportunity presented itself, but also two, I didn't have a whole lot of money. Here I am, like 20 years old. You going to buy vintage guitars when you're 20 years old, working at, Burger King or whatever it was I was doing at the time. So yeah, I was buying signs and, catalogs and all this kind of peripheral stuff. And I've enjoyed, I've made that a huge part of what and who I am for the last 30 plus years. Cause I find that stuff, I put it this way, I'll get more excited about an old sign I've never seen than probably an old guitar, because the old guitars, get online and how many old Strats can you find? 1,000?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Try to find a 50s Fender sign. You might find 3 or 4, 5. Every now and then a sign will come up nobody even knew existed. And that's pretty damn cool.
Yeah. Now, a month ago, you were in the Wall Street Journal, quoted in an article about how to spot a fake.
Yeah, that's funny. That's funny because that story hit, because the main photo for that story is Joe Bonamassa, and that story hit a week after I was at Joe's, and neither he nor I knew that was going to turn out like it did. So he's like the first photo, and I'm in like the first paragraph. So it was really just kind of a dumb coincidence that that it ended up like
Eric,
that.
Reading that article, it never really occurred to me that. I guess you always think of the fake market as being somewhat underground and dark and over there in that corner kind of thing. But that article really shed some light that it's a real problem, right? And
oh, absolutely.
It's important. It's important to have these guitars authenticated.
Absolutely. The guitar lawsuit that I was in, I think it was 13 fake Les Pauls in that deal. So that was 13 six-figure guitars that were fake.
Wow, that's crazy.
And
Eric, what's harder to fake, a Les Paul or a Strat?
Definitely a Les Paul. The chicanery with Fenders tends to be refin. Somebody will try to repaint it and pass it off as original. Fender did custom colors over Sunburst. So if you can find a clean Sunburst guitar and spray a color over it and get it believable, that's a huge temptation. And I'll tell you something, I think there's a shitload of fake custom color Fenders out there. And when I say shitload, I mean ones that nobody knows they're fake. Like, people think they have a legit guitar and they're not, because there's some guys that are doing Fender custom colors so well. And what I know of those people, I don't put it past them one bit. Which is why if I see a custom color Fender, I'm not going to pay a lot for it, because unless there's like a credible photo from like back in the day, or something that tells me that, yeah, this guitar is legit. And honestly, it's probably a guitar that's beat to death, because the wear is by far the most difficult thing to get right. And because the thing is, you also have to get the neck and the body to have the same kind of wear. And that's not easy to do. So I'm more inclined to believe a guitar that's got a tremendous amount of wear, just because that is real hard to get right. And the thing is, I see that stuff and I look at it and it just drives me crazy. Whereas other people look at it that, you know, maybe aren't used to looking at it, and they go, oh, it looks great. It's like, no, it doesn't look great.
Yeah.
So Eric, what is the what do you think? When will some of the '80s guitars? When do you think that they'll become highly desirable in the vintage market? Because there were some great guitars built in the '80s. And to your earlier point, I know that a lot of our heroes right now aren't necessarily playing those guitars. They're playing updated versions of those guitars, so forth and so on. But, you know, the Kramer guitars, you know, from the '80s, the Charvels, the Jacksons, it seems like the price of Charvel has really gone up the last several years.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of really funny stuff behind that, because I can remember back in the '90s, I remember having a customer come in my shop from Atlanta, and he was a vintage guitar guy. And at the time, I had a couple of Van Halen graphics, and I was telling him what they were worth and what I thought they were going to be worth. And he literally thought I was just a complete idiot. He's like, those guitars will never be worth what a Fender is. And I'm like, you are absolutely wrong. And he was so offended that he literally walked out of my shop, like insulted on some level, because he thought that I was just so full of shit. And I was right, because that, you know, all that stuff came full circle with the Van Halen stuff. That stuff is the most desirable. You know, in some ways, it's much easier to sell a Van Halen graphic than it is even maybe even a custom color Strat. It's a little less money than a custom color Strat, probably more money than a Sunburst. But if you know what you're looking at, you know.
I don't really know about that. Maybe you know, I tend to differ. I think those Charvels with the Van Halen graphic are about 10,000, maybe 12,000 if it's super duper clean. If it's super duper clean. But, you know, I have a buddy of mine who just bought two of them and paid didn't even pay 20 grand for them, for two of them.
Yeah,
and they're
well,
real.
you know,
they're real deal.
And here we are talking about a Van Halen I bought that literally should be priceless. Stuff does happen, and it's inexplicable. I mean, I know where there's some Charvels are right now that I think are a relatively very good deal, that I'm kind of going, God, should I buy that? Should I buy that? And I'm kind of on the fence about it. And even the boogie body stuff, because mostly when you're buying boogie body stuff, you're not really buying a whole guitar. You're usually buying a body or a neck. But that stuff, you know, particularly the bodies, are very, very difficult to come by.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's the thing that makes
now.
80s good. The thing that makes 80s guitars a little out of the ordinary are the people that collect them. The people generally that are into 80s guitars are not into vintage guitars. They're just not. So they're more inspired by the fact it is a Van Halen graphic or something along those lines. And the thing that makes me a bit of a pariah is, see, I kind of play on both sides of that street. I'm in the vintage thing, and I'm also into the 80s thing. And that just pisses some people off. It's like, man, when they find that out, it's like you're some kind of, you know, mutant. You know, like you don't even exist in nature, which I find kind of laughable, because at the end of the day, I just like cool guitars. I don't care if they're, you know, I don't care if they're 5 years old or, you know, 50 years old. You know, one of my favorite guitars are those Guild Brian May guitars they made in the mid-90s. That's a guitar that's 25 years old. But, you know, those are amazing guitars, and they're very unique also.
So I have
There's not another guitar out there like it.
82 Pacer Imperial, a real deal, 82. And it's cleaner. It's clean as the days it was new. And right next to it, I have sitting right next to it an original 62 SG Les Paul Jr. So I do both as well.
Good. That's great, man. I'm glad. That thrills me. There needs to be more guys like you out there.
Oh yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's about how good the guitar is.
And this one,
that's what it's all about.
And back then, you know, some of these neck pockets were funny. You know, Joe Satriani, his main guitar in the early '80s before he went to Ibanez was this guitar with a rosewood board, and he said he could literally do this, and the neck would be moving in the pocket like crazy. This one. You can take the screws out, the bolts out, and keep it tuned in 440, and the neck won't come out.
Right.
So they were,
there's all kind of little tricks you can do, and I do them to my own personal guitars. But if I've got a neck like that, I'll just take a drop of hide glue, and I'll just drop a hide glue in the neck pocket, and I'll just glue it in. Mm-hmm. And if you just put a drop or two of hide glue, you can always heat it and take it off if you need to. But that neck is not going to shift. And I think Richie Blackmore did that with a lot of his Strats. He actually, I don't think he used glue, but he used some sort of filler on those 70s Strats that he had. And he had that guy Dalk do that to all of his Strats. So, you know.
You had a Richie Blackmore Strat at one point, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I had his 77 that may be the only Blackmore Strat that was unmolested in existence, because he was notorious for smashing stuff. And even his main Strat that he used, that he loved the most, ended up getting some work done to it that pretty much destroyed it to the point where he would no longer use it. And he gave the guitar to a guy named Stuart Smith, who was a friend of his that lived on Long Island, and he had it for a long time. But yeah, interesting guitar. It had the little control thing in it that Dalk put in him, the little tone circuit thing, the little red thing with a gain adjuster on it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool. I love Richie Blackmore's guitar tone.
Some sort of passive EQ thing. Yeah, it was crazy, and I think the number on it looks like
I think his phone is going.
Yeah, I think my phone is going.
Well, it's 10 o'clock. Do you want to call it here and maybe do a part 2, or do you want to keep going? Do you want to do that, or would you rather maybe plug your phone in and keep going? What would you like to do?
Well, I got my audio in the input, so I say we call it a day, and let's pick this up and do round 2, because I mean, honestly, we scratched the surface.
I love it.
I'm telling you, this I'm having one of the best times of my life right here with all these stories, and you know, I feel that you and I have a lineage that, you know, we could both be doing the same thing here. You know, it's so funny because a lot of your stories, I'm like, yeah, that sounds familiar to me. You know, a lot of stuff. It's just so cool listening to your stories. It's great.
Eric, we can't thank you enough. You've gotten so many kudos from our viewers tonight. They've enjoyed all of this.
Well, yeah.
Oh boy.
And I think we're about to losing.
Yeah. You know what, Ty? Why don't you see if you can call him? Well, I guess you can't do that either because
he's using his phone.
Thank you, guys. Yeah. I appreciate.
Well, we appreciate you.
It's been our pleasure.
Appreciate it very much.
It's been our pleasure, and we'll you and I will work together to schedule a part 2. And I'm so thankful that you agreed to do this. It's been fantastic.
Me too. Thank you, Eric. I really appreciate this. I think that's going to be it. So, Ty, thank you so much again, as always. Wonderful. Oh, there he is. Yep. He's gone.
Eric Ernest, you can find him on Instagram. You can find him on Facebook. The name of his business is Abalone Vintage, and you can find that on the web. He's got great photographs on his website. everybody should check that out. And he is a wealth of, as you just witnessed, he's a wealth of knowledge about all things guitar, and we're so fortunate to have had him tonight.
Absolutely.
And Eric and I will work together to schedule a part 2.
Great. Sounds good. Ty, good night, and I'm sure I'll talk to you tomorrow. Or even after
Dave,
this for a second.
Always a pleasure, Dave. Good to see you.
Here. Everyone in the chat, thank you very much. Check us out next Tuesday at 8 p.m. when we interview Brandon Paul. He will be here.
That's right. A very special Tuesday episode of NEZ SEZ.
Yes. And if you wish, sometime Sunday in the early evening, 5 or 6ish, if you want to check out me with my rig rundown part 5, I'd be happy to have you join me. On that note, everyone.
Ben Coombs, thank you very much, Ben.
Yes, thank you, Ben. And I'll make sure if I do my Sunday that it'll be before your show starts. Have a good night, everybody. Have a safe week. Have a great weekend.